A simple elderly woman laughed at in a real estate office. Then her rich son buys the entire building. Margaret Wilson had always been a simple woman. At 73, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite her modest appearance. Gray hair tied back in a practical bun, well-worn but clean clothes, and hands that spoke of decades of hard work. After her husband Frank's passing 2 years ago, she'd been living alone in their small rental apartment in Chicago's Albany Park neighborhood. On this crisp October morning, Margaret stood before the mirror, preparing for an appointment she'd been dreading. The landlord had raised her rent again, and her fixed income couldn't stretch any further. After 40 years in the same neighborhood, she needed to find something more affordable. The thought of leaving the place where she'd raised her son Michael broke her heart, but she saw no alternative. "You can do this, Maggie," she whispered to herself, using the nickname Frank had always called her. She clutched her worn leather purse, containing meticulously organized paperwork showing her perfect payment history and excellent credit despite her limited means. The Lakeview real estate office occupied the ground floor of a sleek high-rise on Michigan Avenue. Its glass and chrome interior made Margaret feel immediately out of place as she pushed through the revolving door. Young professionals in tailored suits moved with purpose across the polished marble floor, none sparing her a glance. "Excuse me," Margaret said softly to the receptionist, a young woman with perfectly manicured nails who was typing rapidly at her computer. "I have an appointment with Mr. Aui Fenan Forns Davidson at 10. The receptionist glanced up, her eyes quickly assessing Margaret before returning to her screen. "Your name?" "Margaret Wilson." After a moment, the receptionist sighed. "Have a seat. He's running behind." Margaret settled into an uncomfortable modern chair, clutching her purse on her lap. She waited patiently as people who arrived after her were called in for their appointments. After an hour, she approached the desk again. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I've been waiting quite a while for Mr. Davidson." The receptionist exchanged glances with another agent nearby. "Mr. Davidson is very busy today. Perhaps you'd like to reschedule." "I took 3 buses to get here," Margaret explained, "and I really need to find a new place soon." A tall man in an expensive suit approached. "I'm Thomas Davidson. What seems to be the problem?" Before Margaret could speak, the receptionist interjected, "This lady is looking for something affordable." Davidson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I see. Well, Mrs. Wilson. Margaret Wilson. Mrs. Wilson, our properties start at $2,000 a month for studios. I'm afraid we might not have anything suitable for your situation." "My budget is $200, Margaret said, maintaining her dignity. "I have excellent credit and references." A few agents nearby exchanged smirks. One whispered audibly, "Is she looking for a cardboard box?" Davidson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Wilson, this is a luxury real estate office. We don't handle subsidized housing. Perhaps you should try the Community Assistance Center." Margaret felt her cheeks burn. "I don't need subsidized housing. I've never taken a handout in my life. I just need something modest within my means." Davidson glanced at his watch. "I'm afraid I have clients waiting. Jennifer can give you some pamphlets for senior services." As Margaret stood there, the receptionist slid some wrinkled brochures across the counter without looking up. The humiliation was overwhelming, but Margaret held her head high as she collected the papers. "Thank you for your time," she said quietly, her voice barely wavering. As she pushed through the revolving door, she heard laughter behind her. In the reflection of the glass, she could see Davidson mimicking her hunched posture to the amusement of his colleagues. Outside, Margaret blinked back tears. She found a bench and sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled out her cell phone, a gift from her son that she rarely used. She hesitated before dialing, not wanting to burden him with her problems, but needing to hear a friendly voice. Michael Wilson stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office. The Seattle skyline spread before him like a living painting. At 45, he had built Nexus Technologies from a startup in his garage to a tech giant worth billions. His success story was legendary in Silicon Valley and beyond. The son of a factory worker and a school janitor who had coded his way to fortune. Despite his wealth, Michael lived relatively modestly. His passion was innovation, not luxury, though his position required certain concessions to appearance. The only extravagance he truly enjoyed was supporting causes his parents would approve of: educational programs for underprivileged kids, medical research, and housing initiatives for the elderly. His administrative assistant buzzed through the intercom. "Michael, your mother's calling on line 1. Should I tell her you'll call back after the board meeting?" Michael glanced at his watch. The meeting could wait. "Put her through, Diane." He picked up immediately. "Mom, what a nice surprise." "Michael, dear, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." His mother's voice sounded strained despite her attempt at cheerfulness. "Never too busy for you, Mom. What's up?" There was a pause. "Oh, nothing much. Just wanted to hear your voice. How are things with you?" Michael frowned. He knew his mother never called without a reason, and never during business hours. "Mom, what's wrong?" "And don't say nothing, because I know that's not true." Another pause. Longer this time. "It's just, the landlord raised the rent again. I've been looking for something else, but it's not going well." Michael felt a familiar frustration. He'd been trying to convince his mother to move to Seattle or to let him buy her a nice condo in Chicago. But she had always refused, valuing her independence. "Mom, you know I can help." I don't want to be a burden, Michael. I've always managed on my own. You've never been a burden. Tell me what happened today." Reluctantly, Margaret recounted her experience at Lakeview Real Estate. With each detail, Michael felt his anger rising. His mother had worked her fingers to the bone cleaning other people's homes to put him through college, had gone without so he could have opportunities. And now these privileged people were treating her like she was nothing. "Which office was this?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Oh, it doesn't matter. I shouldn't have bothered you with this." "Mom, please, which office?" "Lakeview Real Estate on Michigan Avenue." "But Michael, promise me you won't do anything. I just needed to vent." "I promise I won't do anything." Rash. Michael chose his words carefully. "Listen, I've been meaning to tell you. I'm coming to Chicago next week for a conference. Let's look at some places together. Okay?" After saying goodbye, Michael sat motionless for a moment. Then he pressed the intercom. "Diane, cancel my meetings for the rest of the day. And get me everything you can find on Lakeview Real Estate in Chicago. Ownership, financials, property holdings, everything." "Is this for the Urban Renewal Project?" Diane asked. "No, this is personal." Michael's fingers were already flying across his keyboard, searching for information. "And Diane, book me on the first flight to Chicago tomorrow morning. But the board meeting can be handled remotely." "This can't wait." Within hours, Michael had a complete dossier on Lakeview Properties, LLC. The company owned the building where their offices were located, along with several other commercial properties in downtown Chicago. They were successful, but overextended, having taken on significant debt for recent acquisitions. More importantly, they were seeking additional investment for expansion. Michael made one more call before leaving the office. "Nathan, it's Michael Wilson. Remember when you said you owed me for connecting you with those investors? I'm calling in that favor." The following morning found Thomas Davidson nervously straightening his tie in his office mirror. Word had come down from the owner that a major investor was interested in putting significant capital into Lakeview Properties, potentially solving their cash flow issues. All he knew was that the investor was a tech billionaire from the West Coast who was diversifying into real estate. "Make this happen, Tom," his boss had instructed. "Commission structure will be very generous if you close this deal." The office was buzzing with excitement. Extra coffee had been ordered, the reception area had been filled with fresh flowers, and everyone had been instructed to be on their absolute best behavior. The receptionist's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Davidson, your 10 o'clock appointment is here." Davidson smoothed his hair one last time and strode into the reception area, his most confident smile in place. It faltered slightly when he saw not one but two people waiting. A distinguished-looking man in a perfectly tailored suit, and beside him, Margaret Wilson. "Mr. Wilson, welcome to Lakeview Properties. I'm Thomas Davidson, Senior Vice President." He extended his hand, deliberately focusing only on Michael, ignoring Margaret completely. Michael didn't take the offered hand. "I believe you've already met my mother, Mrs. Wilson." Davidson's smile froze as the blood drained from his face. He looked from Michael to Margaret and back again, recognition and horror dawning in his eyes. "Mrs. Wilson, of course. Lovely to see you again." His voice had risen an octave. Michael's expression remained impassive. "Is there somewhere private we can talk, Mr. Davidson?" "Certainly. My office is—" "Actually," Michael interrupted, "I'd like to see the building first. I understand your company owns this entire structure." "Yes, all 18 floors. We occupy the ground level, and the rest is leased to various businesses." Davidson was sweating now, stealing glances at Margaret, who stood quietly beside her son, her expression unreadable. "Excellent. Show me everything, please. My mother will accompany us." For the next 2 hours, Davidson led them through the building, growing increasingly desperate as Michael asked pointed questions about occupancy rates, maintenance costs, and structural issues. At each stop, Michael introduced Margaret to the tenants they encountered, always as "my mother, Mrs. Wilson." When they returned to Davidson's office, Michael sat down and gestured for his mother to take the seat beside him. "So, Mr. Davidson, I understand Lakeview Properties is looking for investors." Davidson nodded eagerly. "Yes, we have exciting expansion plans that—" "I'm not interested in being an investor," Michael interrupted. "I want to buy this building outright." Davidson blinked rapidly. "The entire building, but it's not officially on the market." "Everything has a price, Mr. Davidson. I've already spoken with your majority owner, Nathan Reynolds. We're old friends. He's amenable to selling, provided the offer is right." Michael slid a folder across the desk. "These are the terms I'm prepared to offer. As you'll see, they're quite generous." Davidson opened the folder, his eyes widening as he saw the figure on the preliminary offer sheet. It was well above market value, enough to clear their debt and leave a substantial profit. "This is very generous," Davidson managed. "But I'll need to discuss this with—" "Nathan is expecting your call," Michael said coolly. "I'll wait." Davidson excused himself and practically ran from the room. When they were alone, Margaret turned to her son. "Michael, what are you doing?" she whispered. "Business, Mom, just business." He squeezed her hand. "Trust me." 20 minutes later, Davidson returned, his complexion ashen. "Mr. Reynolds has agreed to your terms in principle. He says you can work out the details directly." "Excellent," Michael said, rising to his feet. "One more thing, Mr. Davidson. Under the new ownership structure, there will be some changes to the tenant arrangements in this building." Davidson nodded nervously. "Of course. That's your prerogative as the new owner." "Yes, it is." Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'll have my team contact you with details soon. In the meantime, my mother and I have some apartment hunting to do. Perhaps you can recommend a reputable agency, one that deals with—" "What was the term you used?" "Subsidized housing." Davidson's face flushed crimson. "Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Wilson, I want to sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding during our previous—" "No misunderstanding, Mr. Davidson. Everything was perfectly clear." Michael placed his hand gently on his mother's shoulder. "Good day." As they left the office, Margaret whispered, "Michael, you didn't have to do this." "I know, Mom. But some lessons need to be taught." He smiled down at her. "Besides, it's actually a solid investment. Now, let's find you a place to live." Over the next week, Michael extended his stay in Chicago, using his Seattle office as a remote base while he finalized the purchase of the Lakeview building. Margaret watched with a mixture of pride and concern as her son worked tirelessly, shuttling between meetings with lawyers, inspectors, and financial advisors. "You shouldn't neglect your real work because of me," she told him over dinner at her modest apartment. Michael looked up from his laptop. "Mom, this is real work, and it's actually turning out to be a smart business move. The building has been undervalued and poorly managed. With some upgrades and better tenant relations, the return on investment will be substantial." Margaret studied her son's face. She'd always been able to read him, even when he thought he was hiding his feelings. And what about Thomas Davidson and his team? What happens to them? Michael closed his laptop. "That depends." "On what?" "On you." Michael reached across the table and took her hand. "Mom, I want you to run the building." Margaret nearly choked on her tea. "Michael, that's absurd." "I don't know the first thing about property management. You managed that apartment complex on Diversey for 5 years after Dad got hurt. That was different. It was a small building, and I just collected rent and called repairmen when things broke. Which is exactly what property management is, along with treating people with respect and dignity." Michael's eyes were earnest. The building needs someone honest, who won't look down on tenants who aren't wealthy or connected. Someone who understands the value of $1 and won't waste money on flashy renovations that don't improve quality of life. Margaret shook her head. "I'm 73 years old, Michael. No one would take me seriously." "They will when they learn you're the owner's mother and have full authority." Michael smiled. "Besides, you'll have a professional team supporting you. You'll be the heart of the operation, the one who sets the tone and makes the final decisions." "And what about Davidson and his people?" Michael's expression hardened slightly. "That's where you come in. If you take this position, you decide who stays and who goes. It's your call, all of it." Margaret was silent for a long moment, thinking of the humiliation she'd felt in that sleek office, the whispers and smirks at her expense. Then she thought of how it would feel to fire people who had families to support, even if they were unkind. "I'll consider it," she said finally, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, I want a fair chance for everyone. No automatic firing. They deserve the opportunity to prove themselves under new management." Michael nodded. "Agreed." "Second, I want to establish a program for affordable housing consultation. Not everyone can afford luxury, but everyone deserves respect and help finding a home within their means." "Done." "Anything else?" Margaret looked around her small apartment, at the photos of Frank and Michael on the wall, the familiar furniture that held decades of memories. "Yes, I'm keeping this apartment. Whatever happens, this is still my home." 2 days later, Margaret found herself back at Lakeview Real Estate, this time accompanied by Michael and his lawyer. The office fell silent as they entered, all eyes turning toward them. Davidson hurried forward, his smile strained. "Mr. Wilson, Mrs. Wilson, what a pleasure to see you again. We've prepared the documents as requested. Would you like coffee before we begin?" "No, thank you," Michael said. "I think it's best we get straight to business." In Davidson's office, Michael's lawyer laid out the final purchase agreement. As Davidson reached for his pen to sign, Michael held up his hand. Before we conclude this transaction, there's something I'd like to clarify. This building will be owned by Wilson Properties, LLC, but the day-to-day management will be handled by my mother, Margaret Wilson. Davidson's pen froze mid-air. I'm sorry. Mrs. Wilson will be making all operational decisions going forward, including staffing, tenant relations, and building improvements. Michael's tone was matter-of-fact. She'll be evaluating the current team over the next 30 days and determining who will remain with the company. Davidson looked as though he might faint. But Mrs. Wilson doesn't have experience in luxury real estate management. Mrs. Wilson has experience in something far more valuable: treating people with dignity regardless of their economic status. Michael's voice had an edge now, something notably lacking in your operation. Margaret, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. Mr. Davidson, I believe everyone deserves a chance to prove their worth. You'll have that opportunity, just as I should have had when I came here seeking help. The transformation of Lakeview Properties began the very next day. Margaret arrived at 8:30, dressed in a simple but professional navy blue suit, a gift from Michael. She carried a worn leather briefcase that had belonged to Frank, containing notebooks and her ever-present reading glasses. The receptionist, Jennifer, looked up in surprise as Margaret approached the desk. Mrs. Wilson, we weren't expecting you so early. Mr. Davidson isn't in yet. That's fine, Jennifer. I'm not here to see Mr. Davidson. I'm here to begin work. Margaret's voice was kind but firm. Could you please gather all staff in the conference room at 9? I'd like to introduce myself properly. At 9 o'clock sharp, Margaret stood before the assembled staff of Lakeview Properties. Some looked curious, others resentful, and a few seemed genuinely frightened. Davidson stood at the back, his expression carefully neutral. Good morning, Margaret began. As you know, this company has been acquired by Wilson Properties. What you may not know is that I will be overseeing operations going forward. She paused, surveying the room. I imagine some of you have concerns about this arrangement. That's natural. Change is always unsettling. A hand went up. It belonged to a young man in his 20s. Mrs. Wilson, with all due respect, what do you know about luxury real estate? Before Margaret could answer, Davidson stepped forward. Keith, that's completely inappropriate. No, Mr. Davidson, it's a fair question. Margaret smiled at the young man. I know very little about luxury real estate, Keith, but I know a great deal about homes. A home isn't just square footage and granite countertops. It's security, comfort, and dignity. Whether someone is spending $1,000 a month or $10,000, they deserve to be treated with respect and honesty. She moved from behind the podium, walking closer to the staff. I also know that a successful business treats all potential clients with equal consideration. The young couple saving for their first condo may not bring in a big commission today, but in 10 years, they might. The elderly woman on a fixed income might have a son or daughter looking for luxury accommodations. Margaret paused, making eye contact with several staff members. Over the next month, I'll be meeting with each of you individually. I'll be evaluating not just your sales figures, but how you treat people. All people, those who share my vision for this company, will have a place here. Those who don't will be given a generous severance package. After the meeting, Davidson approached her. Mrs. Wilson, I want to personally apologize again for your experience here. It was inexcusable, and I take full responsibility. Margaret studied him for a moment. Mr. Davidson, I appreciate that, but I'm more interested in change than apologies. Actions speak louder than words. Of course. How can I demonstrate that change? Margaret considered this. And there's a waiting room full of clients out there. Some are wealthy investors, some are middle-class families, and some are people with limited means. I'll be observing how you and your team interact with each of them." Davidson nodded, swallowing hard. "Understood." Throughout the day, Margaret observed the operations of the office. She noticed that most agents gravitated toward clients who were well-dressed or mentioned large budgets, while those with modest means often waited longer or received cursory attention. By 5 o'clock, she had made her first decision. She called Jennifer into her new office, a modest room she had chosen instead of the expansive corner office Davidson had offered. "Jennifer, I've been watching you today. You're efficient and organized, which is admirable." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson." Jennifer looked nervous. "However," Margaret continued, "I've also noticed that you prioritize certain clients over others based on appearance or perceived wealth. That will not be acceptable going forward." Jennifer's cheeks flushed. "I just follow Mr. Davidson's protocols for client prioritization. Those protocols have changed. Starting tomorrow, clients will be seen in the order they arrive or by appointment time, regardless of their budget or appearance." Margaret's tone was gentle, but left no room for argument. "Can you adapt to this new approach?" Jennifer hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Wilson." "Good, because I think you have potential. Your organizational skills are impressive. With a change in perspective, you could be a valuable part of our team." Over the next few weeks, Margaret implemented more changes. She established a dedicated department for affordable housing consultations. She instituted a training program on respectful client interactions. And, perhaps most surprisingly to the staff, she began holding regular open forums where employees could share ideas and concerns directly with management. The most remarkable transformation, however, was in Davidson himself. Initially, Margaret had expected resistance or even sabotage from him. Instead, after his initial shock, he had thrown himself into the new vision with unexpected enthusiasm. "You know," he confided to Margaret one evening as they reviewed the day's operations, "I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've never felt good about some of the practices we employed. But it seemed like the only way to succeed." "It's never too late to change course, Mr. Davidson," Margaret replied. "My late husband used to say that the true measure of success is not how much you accumulate, but how much you contribute." Davidson nodded thoughtfully. "Your son is a lucky man to have had such wisdom in his life." "We all have wisdom to share, Mr. Davidson. Sometimes we just need someone to listen." 3 months after Margaret took over Lakeview Properties, Michael returned to Chicago for his monthly visit. He found the office transformed, not just physically, with its warmer, more welcoming decor but in its atmosphere and operations. The reception area now featured comfortable seating, arranged in conversational groups rather than the stark, intimidating layout of before. On the walls hung photographs of Chicago neighborhoods, not just the affluent areas, but the vibrant, diverse communities throughout the city. A new sign prominently displayed, "Everyone deserves a place to call home." Michael observed from a discreet corner as his mother moved through the office, greeting staff and clients with equal warmth. He noticed how the agents now took time with every potential client, regardless of their budget or appearance. And he was particularly struck by the sight of Thomas Davidson patiently explaining housing options to an elderly couple with a modest pension. Later, over dinner at Margaret's apartment, she had steadfastly refused to move despite her new position. Michael raised his glass in a toast. "To the most successful property manager in Chicago." Margaret waved away the compliment. "It's the team that deserves the credit. They've embraced the changes beautifully, even Davidson." "Especially Thomas," Margaret said, surprising Michael with her use of Davidson's first name. "He's been my strongest ally. Once he let go of his preconceptions, He discovered he has a real talent for matching people with homes they can both afford and love. And the Affordable Housing Initiative. Margaret's eyes lit up. It's been more successful than we imagined. We've helped over 50 families and individuals find homes within their means in the past month alone. And it's actually generated goodwill and referrals for the luxury side of the business. Michael studied his mother thoughtfully. You've achieved more in 3 months than most executives do in years. The building's occupancy is up, tenant satisfaction has improved, and profits have increased despite the additional community services. It's not complicated, Michael. Treat people with respect, listen to their needs, and find solutions that work for them. She smiled. The same values your father and I taught you. The same values that built my company. Michael agreed. Speaking of which, I've been thinking about expanding Wilson Properties to other cities. We could replicate this model. One step at a time, Margaret cautioned. A lasting change takes time to cultivate. The next morning, Margaret arrived at the office to find a commotion in the reception area. A well-dressed older woman was engaged in an animated conversation with Jennifer, who looked flustered. "Mrs. Wilson," Jennifer called when she spotted Margaret. "This is Mrs. Cunningham. She's insisting on speaking with the owner." Mrs. Cunningham turned, her expression stern. "Are you in charge here?" "I'm the property manager," Margaret replied calmly. "How can I help you?" "You can explain why my son was told there were no luxury units available in the Palmer House development, only to discover that a unit was sold to someone else the very next day." Mrs. Cunningham's voice carried through the office. "Is it because he's a young black attorney rather than some old money investor?" Several staff members looked up, tension filling the air. Margaret gestured toward her office. "Please, come in, Mrs. Cunningham. Let's discuss this privately." Once they were seated, Margaret listened carefully as Mrs. Cunningham detailed her son's experience. When she finished, Margaret didn't offer excuses or denials. "Mrs. Cunningham, what happened to your son was unacceptable. I'd like to investigate this personally, and I assure you there will be consequences if discrimination was involved." Mrs. Cunningham seemed taken aback by Margaret's directness. "You believe me, just like that?" "I believe that your son's experience deserves serious attention," Margaret said. "And I believe in addressing problems honestly, not sweeping them under the rug." After Mrs. Cunningham left, Margaret called an emergency staff meeting. She didn't name names or make accusations. Instead, she used the incident as an opportunity for reflection and growth. "We've made progress," she told the assembled team, "but today reminds us that we still have work to do. Our commitment to treating everyone with dignity isn't just a slogan. It's the foundation of everything we do here." As the meeting dispersed, Davidson approached Margaret. "I checked the Palmer House listings. Mrs. Cunningham's son was told no units were available by Kevin, but there was definitely one on the market. I've scheduled a meeting with Kevin for this afternoon." "Thank you, Thomas. I'd like to be present for that conversation." By day's end, Margaret had uncovered the truth, addressed the issue with Kevin, who was placed on probation and required to complete diversity training, and personally called Mrs. Cunningham's son to apologize and offer him first choice of 2 newly listed luxury units. That evening, as Margaret locked up the office, she found Michael waiting for her in the lobby. "Quite a day from what I hear," he said, falling into step beside her. "News travels fast. The building manager called me. He was impressed with how you handled the situation." Michael held the door open for her. "You know, when I bought this building, it was partly out of anger at how you were treated. And partly as a sound business investment," Margaret reminded him with a smile. "True, but I never expected all this." He gestured back toward the office. "You've created something remarkable here, Mom. You've changed people's lives, not just the clients who find homes they can afford, but the staff who've learned a better way to do business." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Margaret spoke again. "Your father would be proud of you, Michael. Not because you're successful or wealthy, but because you stood up for what's right." "He'd be proud of both of us," Michael replied. "Though he'd probably say we made too much fuss over nothing." Margaret laughed, remembering Frank's humble, no-nonsense approach to life. He would at that. As they reached her apartment building, Michael hesitated. "Mom, I've been meaning to ask, are you happy with all this? Is running Lakeview what you want to be doing at this stage of your life?" Margaret considered the question seriously. "I am happy, yes. Not because I enjoy property management particularly, but because I'm making a difference. For the first time in years, I feel like I have a purpose beyond just getting through each day." She touched her son's arm gently. "That's the greatest gift you've given me, Michael. Not the job or the title, but the opportunity to matter again." Michael wrapped his mother in a tight embrace. "You've always mattered, Mom. Always." As the sun set over Chicago, casting long shadows across the city they both loved, Margaret Wilson reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the humiliation of that first visit to Lakeview real estate, to now overseeing its transformation into a model of ethical business practices. It was a path she could never have imagined. The simple elderly woman who had once been laughed at had found her voice, her purpose, and her second act. And in doing so, she'd not only changed her own life, but had set in motion changes that would ripple out to touch countless others. All because she had faced adversity with dignity and responded to contempt with compassion rather than vengeance. In the gathering dusk, mother and son walked arm in arm into the apartment building, their silhouettes merging with the shadows. Two people who had changed their corner of the world not through wealth or power alone, but through the values that had guided them all along: respect, dignity, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves to be treated with kindness, regardless of their station in life.